So you're good from here?
I think so. Okay, let's see. Okay, so then I have one question. How do I mute everybody? So I'm supposed to go like here? I should just share my screen. Is this prettier?
Let's see if everything up. And then I think if you go to the bottom and you say participants, I think you can mute it from participants.
I don't want this. Welcome back. It's like all I can do is.
Go to the Zoom.
Right here.
Yeah. You go to try the Eleanor. Yeah, the Eleanor Ellsworth. You can get to that image. Looks like you can mute individually there.
Hi there. Okay, now hold on. Share screen.
Okay, good morning.
Good morning. Okay.
All right.
Well, why
I
is
know
it-
you've got your helpers, so I'll leave you alone.
I know, I'm trying to get you both in here. Okay. Why isn't my,
Why don't you expand this to the full screen?
So then you can.
Gallery view. Honey,
I know, but just
can you see my first slide of the PowerPoint?
yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Sophia, stay on my own.
I'll be over there.
Hi, Betty.
I won. What time are they coming?
Okay.
Yeah, the code. Did they send it to you?
They did.
I'm gonna watch it online.
Okay.
Okay, then I don't bother you.
Okay, good.
I have another presentation later this afternoon. So I'm here at the museum because Donald Trump has come to town.
Oh, the horror.
So getting here, I'm so fortunate that I said, you know, I should just do it at the museum because that would be a problem. It just, you know, it just snarls everything.
Yeah. But you did a good job yesterday.
Well, thank you. You're nice. It's gotten chilly overnight.
Oh, yes. I've got on knee socks. I'm not going to show you.
Okay. Oh my gosh. So I brought, my editor gave me a dummy of the book. This is the new book. Yay.
Okay.
So it's printing right now.
I've got your other book.
Oh, good. Yay. I just asked about that last night. So they, the Hellenic Society of Philadelphia is celebrating the 1821 Greek War of Independence next year, the bicentennial. So they asked me to speak about that furniture. So using, of course, my full name.
Maiden name. Yes. Mhm.
And are Eileen's children in school? It looks
Yes,
like
they are. 5 days,
5 days, yeah.
kindergarten and pre-K.
Wow. Well, good for her. I mean, that would just be, oh gosh.
Yeah, yeah.
Our children are 5 days too, and
In school?
yeah.
Are they both in high school?
8th grade and 11th grade. So, yeah. We'll see.
still
I mean,
grown up.
I'm hopeful, you know, but.
By the way, happy birthday.
Thank you. How did you remember that? Oh my goodness.
Oh, it's
It's a
one.
big birthday this year.
I know it is.
Oh. So. Yep, it's, yeah. Oh, well, we all get old at the same rate, as I like to say.
Yes. Eileen is 1 year older than you.
Yes. She had a fun time though, I remember.
Yeah,
You did a party.
yeah, big party, big party.
Yeah, there was a picture, I remember this, okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
We're having a small party, very small.
I guess you have to this year.
Right. Outside, so. At least we don't have to cook.
Oh dear. Okay. Well, we still have 15 minutes, so don't let me disturb you.
Oh, no. A little drink. And who do you have in college now?
Eddie's Teddy is at Scranton. Sheila's Teresa is at NC State. Sheila has 2 college graduates already. John has 1 college graduate. John's Brian is at Fordham.
Oh.
Yeah. Let's see.
So the one graduate was from Hamilton, isn't that right? I
That
met
was
her.
Madeline. And
Right.
she actually has a job with Citibank.
Oh, great.
Working
Good
from
for
her bedroom. Yeah.
Right.
A little
Right.
disconcerting. So.
In New York or in Connecticut? Is she?
In New York. Well, her bedroom's in Connecticut, but yes. It's hard to find a mentor that way, you know.
Right. Oh my gosh. Well, Eileen's are just adorable. I love all of her posts.
Yeah.
So nice.
All right, so we better stop being social.
How many do we have? Can you tell?
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe 10 so far, but we're
Right.
15 minutes early, so.
Okay. I'm never early, so this is good. Okay, I'll be right back. I will be here.
How are you, Betty?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you, Hanson. Hi, Linda.
Okay. I see the patronage sign, but I don't see Alexandra.
No, she just stepped away for a minute. She'll be right back.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. So,
Linda, you're on
the
mute.
three of us have voices and everybody else is on mute. Good.
Okay.
But I can unmute myself. He,
No,
Sally?
you should be on because Sally, you're going to be the introducer. Yep.
Hey, Swanson. I see you.
Yeah, I see Dick Swanson
Yep.
and Stephen Sand.
Hello, can you see Phyllis and Roger? Hello?
Everyone was going to be muted.
Well, he's not muted. Hello, Hanson.
I see you.
Hi.
Okay, hello, how are you, Sally?
Good, good. How are you?
Good, nice to see you.
Thank you.
Okay. I can't see
I'm
you.
looking at the screen. I guess they'll start in a few minutes.
Yeah, we're early.
Okay. What I see is the opening picture
first
of
slide.
of your lecture. Yeah, first slide. Ah, now I see you. Good morning, or good noontime.
Was I making you nervous?
There's Hanson, Swanson's there.
These are all friends. Don't worry about it.
I would worry about anything he says.
Okay, got it. Duly noted.
Yeah.
Is muted.
I see.
Everybody else is muted except.
Okay. You want some water or something?
No. What's Roger Brown's wife's name?
Just a second.
Yeah.
it's Nancy.
Stephen Sand, would you nod if you can hear me?
Phyllis.
Thank you.
No.
Did you tell her that we want her to come and visit us all when this is all over with her family?
I have told her many times.
Is there something giving a thumbs up?
Pardon me?
So Linda Robbins, would you nod if you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Couldn't find me. Link.
Mute your microphone. Okay.
So. I'll look again.
Just came yesterday.
Phyllis Brown, can you hear me? Okay, just got muted.
I want to get back to the screen. How do I get back to the screen? How do I get back to the screen? Okay.
Down at the bottom, there, you got it. Okay.
Can you see us
Okay,
now?
so Phyllis, can you hit your mute on the, down at the bottom to the bottom left? Mute your speaker there, good. 2 more minutes and we'll get started. I see Roger there in the background. 12 o'clock by my watch. I'll get started. My name is Hanson Robbins, and I'm chair of the WC All Special Events and Subcommittee. We're responsible for organizing and running WC All trips and the Learn It Lunches. The current pandemic ruined our program last spring, forcing us to cancel 2 Learn It Lunches and 2 trips. We had already arranged for 3 Learn It Lunches for this fall. Rather than canceling them, we decided to arrange Zoom presentations instead. Thankfully, the speakers all agreed to try it. This is the first one featuring Alexandra Kirtley, who is the curator of American Decorative Arts at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. She will give us a unique view of the Eastern Shore life from the mid-1600s on, through the eyes of the Lloyd family. I've asked Sally Sweetser, a dear friend of Alexandra, to introduce her. First, I have 2 housekeeping requests. To all the listeners, please have your mics muted to minimize background noise. At the end of Alexandra's presentation, she will take questions from you, at which point you can unmute your mics. Now, Sally, it's your turn.
Thank you, Hanson, and good afternoon, everybody. We're here today to hear Alexandra Kirtley tell us about the Lloyd family, who settled much of the Eastern Shore in the 1650s. Alexandra theorizes that many of us probably live today on land that was once owned by the Lloyds. You know from what Hanson just said and from our invitation that Alexandra is the well-known and highly respected curator of American decorative arts at the Philadelphia Museum of Art for almost 20 years. She got her master's from the University of Delaware Winter Tour program in 1999, where they still virtually genuflect at the mention of her name. And I'm not kidding about that. Having known Zan, that's short for Alexandra, for 30 years, Peter and I wanted to say hello to her when WC All visited the museum in April of 2019. Hello turned into a 5-hour private tour for Peter and me of her favorite exhibits and triumphant acquisitions for the museum, as well as a visit to the conservator's shop to show Peter their workshop. She was so generous with her time, despite having enormous day-to-day responsibilities, and with her deep knowledge of the early inhabitants of the Delmarva Peninsula, their culture and collections of art and furniture, we knew she would be a very welcome guest at our Learn It Lunch. So thank you, Zan, and here she is, Alexandra Kirtley.
Thank you, Peter and Sally and Hanson. It's so wonderful to be here. Can everybody hear me well?
Yep.
Okay. I usually don't have a problem being heard, as Sally and Peter know. I am actually also a native of Maryland, and the subject that I'm going to talk to you about today was the subject of my thesis, my master's degree thesis from the University of Delaware Winter Tour program, where I wanted to study works of art that also had supporting information in manuscripts, in papers that would be accessible in, for instance, a historical society. The most obvious question in Maryland art and architecture was the Lloyd family. And no one had ever studied them comprehensively. And the question was there little information about their art and architecture, and that was why nobody had studied them? Or was there too much information and it was sort of overwhelming? Well, it ended up that the latter was the truth. And I spent a summer going through the Lloyd family's papers at the Maryland Historical Society, which are on reel as well as in manuscript form. The Lloyd papers are there. And then I was able to have fortunate access to the house because the house is still privately held. It is owned today by the 12th and 13th generation. They straddle generations for obvious reasons. It's owned by and lived in by the 12th and 13th generation, direct descendants of the Lloyd family. The surname is no longer Lloyd because it fell into a female line in the 1920s. But the family is still there. They're extremely generous with visitors, with historians, with archaeologists, with the public, really, especially given the fact that it is a private house. So I will be talking to you about that today. And I have, as you can imagine, spoken on this subject many times. And so there are a lot of quotes. So my presentation will be a little bit hybrid. So it'll be as much as I'm speaking now as I will be reading from quotes. So this is the property that remains today. They own 1,650 acres that they continue to farm today. It is a small portion of what they owned in the 17th, 18th, 19th, and early 20th century. Their land stretched from virtually 301, where you enter Maryland from Delaware, all the way to Cambridge. So as many as 400,000 contiguous acres. The house is called Y House. The property was divided up into smaller plantations that all had names. Matter of fact, when you drive down the Eastern Shore towards Easton, it's just outside of Easton, you see road names and it comes up in their papers all the time. And these are the vestiges of their properties. I should also mention in this election year that an Edward Lloyd was in an elected position in the colony and state of Maryland from 1654 to 1894 continuously. And that was colonial council, legislature, states, congressman, US senator, governor. So they really ran the gamut. They had an extraordinary political impact in Maryland. And of course, most importantly, we should always recognize that not only was the land that they moved to, they colonized, of course, indigenous land, but it was also worked by enslaved Africans that came to the property beginning in the 1680s, and it was as it is from Nova Scotia to Georgia. We all, the economy of early America and early United States was a slave-based economy. So to recognize that. One of the more famous enslaved people who lived at Y House, he was not enslaved by the Lloyds, but he lived at Y House with his enslaver, who was also his father. And that man was the Lloyd family's captain. So he was in charge of their ships. They had a fleet of ships that plied the Chesapeake as well as the Atlantic. And I'll talk about that a little later. But Frederick Douglass lived there for about 8 years. It was a really important moment in his life because he was taught to read there by one of the Lloyd children, Daniel Lloyd. He was sort of assigned to Daniel Lloyd, and Daniel taught him to read. So Frederick Douglass left Y House, went to Baltimore, and of course escaped to freedom and became one of the leaders of the abolitionist movement. And in one of his autobiographies, he describes Y House. Actually, I'll go back here. There were barns, stables, storehouses, and tobacco houses, blacksmiths' shops, wheelwrights' shops, and coopers' shops, all objects of interest. But above all, there stood the grandest building my eyes had ever beheld, called by everyone on the plantation the Great House. This was occupied by Colonel Lloyd and his family. They occupied it, I enjoyed it. The Great House was surrounded by numerous and variously shaped outbuildings. There were kitchens, wash houses, dairies, summer houses, greenhouses, hen houses, turkey houses, pigeon houses, and arbors of many sizes and devices, all neatly painted and altogether interspersed with grand old trees, ornamental and primitive, which afforded shade in the summer and imparted to the scene a high degree of stately beauty. The Great House itself was a large white wooden building with wings on 3 sides of it. In front, a large portico extending the entire length of the building and supported by a long range of columns gave to the whole establishment an air of solemn grandeur. The carriage entrance to the house was 3/4 of a mile from it, and distant from it. The intermediate space was a beautiful lawn, very neatly trimmed and watched with the greatest care. It was dotted thickly with delightful trees, shrubbery, and flowers. The road or lane from the gate to the Great House was richly paved with white pebbles from the beach, and in its course formed a complete circle around the beautiful lawn. Carriages going in and retiring from the Great House made the circuit of the lawn, and their passengers were permitted to behold a scene of Eden-like beauty. Outside the select enclosure were parks where, as about the residences of English nobility, rabbits, deer, and other game might be seen peering and playing about, with none to molest them or make them afraid. The tops of the stately poplars were often covered with red-winged blackbirds, making all nature vocal with the joyous life and beauty of their wild, warbling notes. It was a treat to my young and gradually opening mind to behold this elaborate exhibition of wealth, power, and vanity. These recollections of Douglas, who was enslaved from birth by the captain of the Lloyd's schooner, impart to us an image of a vibrant White House community, free, white, and enslaved, of the early 19th century. Edward Lloyd I, a Welsh Quaker, settled the site in 1659 and immediately began to farm on the verdant shores of the Chesapeake Bay, cultivating tobacco early on, but by the 1680s, wheat, and wheat it remained. Reaping incredible profits from his slave-based economy, Edward Lloyd I and his sons and grandsons parlayed their wheat profits into more land. Eventually, Lloyd-owned land stretched basically down the entire eastern shore of Maryland. The Lloyd family's plantations garnered them extraordinary wealth that, like all of colonial North and South America, was rooted in a slave economy. Their wealth gave them great social and political power and enabled them to become magnificent patrons of the finest worldly goods. Through marriages, the Lloyds forged a dynastic network in Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania, with families such as the Buchanans, Cadwalladers, Carrolls, Chases, Chews, Donnells, Goldsboroughs, Hammonds, Harwoods, Hollidays, Howards, Keys, Lees, Murrays, Platers, Talos, and Tillmans. A strong tradition of patriarchy and primogeniture allowed White House to pass from father to eldest son, all but one of whom was named Edward, into the 20th century, when ownership passed to a second son and then to his daughters. Today, White House remains the seat of Edward Lloyd I's direct descendants. The White House estate is anchored by the family graveyard. The first grave was placed in 1683, and it remains in use, the graveyard, reportedly the oldest in continuous use in the country. Edward Lloyd IV built the surviving house, which you've seen, in 1787. Now, the earlier houses were torn down by the new Edward. So when an Edward was rising, and he was after his father's death, he would sell the furniture and furnishings, as well as tear down the house and use the landscape, the art and the architecture to pronounce himself the proprietor at White House. And in this way, it was also a very strong message of power and who was in power. So this presentation will present a history of the Lloyds and their patronage of art, and considering what survives and how this one family casts their influence across a region as progenitors and arbiters of taste. So Edward Lloyd I came from Wales. He lived in the Wye River Valley, in between the Wye and the Severn. He matriculated at Oxford, and he and his brother Cornelius operated an intercoastal, a trade system, and they decided to move it to colonial North America and work the intercoastal trade. He settled actually first in Virginia, but Edward Lloyd the First was a Quaker, and he refused to say the Apostles' Creed. So he was summarily excommunicated from the Royal Colony of Virginia and came to Maryland, where at the time there was a freedom of religion. There was no religious mandate. He settled on the Western Shore in Providence town, which is off the Severn. He purportedly named the Severn River. And by 1659, he paid for a number of colonists to come from England to Maryland, and you were given land in proportion to that. So Maryland, right, is a manorial colony in that way. So he comes to the Eastern Shore and settles there. This is another view, of course, of the Eastern Shore, looking as we more traditionally see it, of course. So he moves from Anne Arundel County to Talbot County. And here you can see a view of today of where he settled, and even a closer view here, Lloyd Creek. So he began to farm the wheat, was doing quite well. His son Philemon took over. Philemon Edward Lloyd I left, returned to London where he died, and Philemon remained here. Philemon became Anglican, and what was even worse was he married a Catholic. So this was quite shocking to his family, to his father in particular, a Quaker. And the deal was, this is interesting, the male children were Anglican and the female children were Roman Catholic. And her name was Henrietta Maria Neal Bennett Lloyd. She was the widow of Philemon's very best friend who died with him, drowned with him right out in Lloyd Creek when they were fishing one day. And I'll leave it at that. So who knows what happened there. So Henrietta Maria was also the goddaughter of Queen Henrietta Maria of England. She was extremely, extremely sophisticated, erudite, elegant, cosmopolitan woman. And she also brought the first greenhouse, not only the first greenhouse to Wye, but the first greenhouse, it is believed, to North America. Her grandmother, of course, was Catherine de' Medici, who had brought greenhouses from Italy to France. So Henrietta Maria Neal Bennett Lloyd was quite something. And she's referred to as the ancestress of Maryland. So if you're anyone in Maryland, you are descended from her as it goes. So when she died in 1697, her inventory revealed an extraordinary house. She had been running the White House plantation. Her husband had died much earlier. And her house, she had a fully furnished house of case furniture, upholstered chairs, carpets, fully furnished beds with window curtains to suit, 88 pounds of silver plate. The house had 2 parlors and 6 bedchambers. In her closet hung 4 mantua gowns, 7 silk gowns, matching coats, 4 party coats, 2 satin gowns, silk petticoats, party shoes, galoshes, which you all know are quite useful in the Eastern Shore in the springtime, 18 pairs of gloves. Her jewelry included diamond and pearl earrings, diamond, pearl, and colored stone rings. And she is buried at White House. Oops, excuse me, this is a little slide making a riff on Henrietta Maria. Queen Henrietta Maria, you know, is the namesake for Maryland. So that's for whom Maryland is named. Now her son was Edward Lloyd II, and very little survives from Edward Lloyd II. He was married to a woman named Sarah Covington Lloyd. He died fairly young. His widow married his attorney, which was very common in those days. And very little survives except this clock, not the case, but the clock itself is a London-made clock that was acquired by Edward II, as well as 2 deck cannons. These are extraordinary, rare deck cannons. They were cast in London. The holders from the cannon, the holders are actually made of lignum vitae. Very, very unusual, and especially to have in a context, such an American context, to survive like this. Now, these would have been on the Lloyd schooners when the Lloyds arrived at court, they would have let them off. So they were somewhat, they were a show piece. The last person known to have used them was Admiral Franklin Buchanan, who was the first superintendent of the United States Naval Academy. He may have been chosen to be the first superintendent because the Lloyds donated the land in Annapolis for the academy. He switched sides, unfortunately, in the Civil War and joined the Confederate Army. But he stayed at White House pretty much most of the time. The Union troops at the end of the Civil War came to Y. The story goes that he put them out, the deck cannons, out on the front lawn and shot them off, and the Union troops left them alone. That's the story. Now, Edward Lloyd III, who is the son of Edward Lloyd II, is really, this is when the sort of golden age of White House art begins. And it's really marked by this wonderful waiter, a silver waiter. It's 36 inches in diameter. So it's just a massive, massive piece. Sometimes when I give a lecture on this, I actually bring a piece of cardboard that I've cut out to show you how large 36, it's just huge. The rim is cast and the flat part at the center is engraved with the Lloyd coat of arms impaling the Rousby coat of arms. And Edward Lloyd III's wife was Anne Rousby Lloyd. They inherited a tremendous amount of money from their great uncle, or Edward Lloyd's great uncle, whose name was Richard Bennett, who, when he died, was considered the wealthiest man in America in 1749. So they were already wealthy, and then more wealth came in, giving them the access to purchase these extraordinary works of art from London. Now, the way it worked for the Lloyds is they owned every facet of the wheat trade. So they owned the land, they owned the enslaved people who cultivated the wheat, they owned the drying houses, and they owned the ships. So they owned every facet. They did not need to consign anything to anyone else in their wheat trade. So their ships would go to London, sell the wheat in merchant houses in London, gain them credit and cash, and that's how they would acquire their goods. They were so close with their agents, their merchant agents in London, in fact, that Edward Lloyd III's sister, in fact, married one, William Anderson. She went to London and married him. So they were quite close to these people. They purchased everything from them, from their silver to their cheese and their ketchup and their silk and their dogs and their horses. They had a racetrack at White House. So they, it fueled their lifestyle. And this is, in fact, the history of the American South. And this is where you can really see the North and the South having a separate history. In the South, people lived off the land, and that land fueled the economy. They didn't have artisans because they would purchase their goods from London where they sold them. In the North, of course, they had a very young, early artisan tradesman economy. So it's interesting to think about that. As wheat growers, a lot of their works of art actually have the emblems of wheat. So this is a bread basket, an enormous Nautilus shell of a bread basket. The family still uses it. I've actually taken bread from it. So the family still uses this very often at family dinners. The lady on top there is Demeter or Ceres, who's the goddess, the Greek Roman goddess of the wheat. And of course, their coat of arms is on that shield that she's holding. Also surviving from Edward Lloyd III are 602 pieces of tobacco leaf porcelain. So this is a large platter. The family uses that as well. Now, when Edward Lloyd III died in 1770, his estate fell to his 3 children. He had his eldest daughter. His eldest child was a daughter, Elizabeth, and she's at the bottom there holding her daughter, Anne. His first son, his oldest son, was Edward Lloyd IV. And he is seen leaning over his daughter and wife. And his youngest son is Richard Bennett Lloyd on the left there. Now, his actual will stated that 50% of his estate went to his son and namesake. and that 25 went to Elizabeth and Richard Bennett Lloyd. Well, John Cadwallader, who's Elizabeth's husband, would see none of that. So there was a huge fight ensued, and there was, in fact, John Cadwallader, who's from Philadelphia, would write Edward Lloyd and said, he wrote a letter and said, there's a personification of injustice. I dare say it resembles you. So they had all this sort of polite back and forth banter. So Edward Lloyd III said, fine, fine, fine. We will divide it 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Even though John Cadwallader and Richard Bennett Lloyd were always suspicious that Edward was taking more. So a lot of Edward Lloyd III's, I mean, most of Edward Lloyd III's papers were destroyed as a result of that skirmish. So that inhibits the study of it a little bit. Richard Bennett Lloyd, actually in 1774, left North America and went to England as the second son. He had two choices, right? He could enter the military or he could enter the priesthood because the property was not going to him. He purchased a commission in the Coldstream Guards, which is the monarch, king or queen's personal regiment in London. And here he is painted as the officer of the day by Benjamin West. Charles Wilson Peale, who I'm sure you know, a Maryland-born painter, primarily worked here in Philadelphia, but Maryland-born, was at White House at one point and wrote to Benjamin West, with whom he trained, and he said, I'm looking at your countenance of Captain Lloyd. So Richard Bennett Lloyd inherited paintings and mahogany and Japan tables, dressing tables, a bed, a silk-furnished bedstead, but none of what he inherited survives. He married a woman in London named Joanna Lee from the Isle of Wight. Here she is painted by Sir Joshua Reynolds. I said someone else yesterday, but it's Joshua Reynolds. This is owned by the National Gallery in London. And she was brilliant. She had a marriage contract with Richard Bennett Lloyd that assured her 4 years of living in France. I never thought of that. So they moved to France in 1776 after the American Revolution had started. They moved to France, and Richard Bennett Lloyd and Joanna Lee actually served as envoys for Benjamin Franklin. And Franklin thought that he was a very convenient envoy because he was so wealthy that the government, the Continental Army, did not need to pay Richard Bennett Lloyd. He returned to White House in the 1780s, and he brought with him a lot of liquor, a lot of champagne, and 400 yards of pink silk damask, as well as his wife. Richard Bennett Lloyd dies in 1787, and when he died, he owned full-length portraits by Charles Wilson Peale of George Washington and of the Marquis de Lafayette, and those the location of those is unknown today. Here's some details. This painting is actually at Winterthur, and when you visit this painting, sometimes it's hard to see the details. So I always think it's good to show Charles Wilson Peale's painting. Now, Elizabeth Cadwallader and John Cadwallader, Elizabeth Lloyd Cadwallader, were married at White House in 1768. During that time, they acquired a house here in Philadelphia that they began to outfit, and then they moved here in 1770. The question is always, how did they meet? How did they meet? This is a sampler that was acquired by Winterthur and a number of years ago. And it actually shows that it was like that her sampler teacher, her needlework teacher, was from the Philadelphia Needlework School. So we are not sure whether she actually moved here to go to needlework school as a young girl in the 1750s, but it's also possible that she met her husband through his cousin, who is John Dickinson. John Dickinson is from Maryland. He lived in Delaware, and he worked here in Philadelphia. So those are sterling silver threads, that detail I show right here. You can see that they're tarnished, but those are sterling silver threads. It's also difficult to see the paintings that are here at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. It's difficult to see the details on them, so I love to show John Cadwallader is holding his hat, and it has his wig powder on it. That would have been a status And as much of his belly was a status, so was his wig powder. So he shows that. They're sitting, it's difficult to see, but they're sitting in a room. There's a door back here. They're sitting in their parlor. This is a detail, what looks overexposed is actually, you can see John Cadwallader's face right here, Elizabeth is here, and you see how the canvas is sort of tussled up right there. Charles Wilson Peele actually moved the face of John Cadwallader back and down. And that's what you can see in raking light on that painting. So we always love to see the artist's hand there, right? And the change of his idea. This is just the corner showing her wonderful silk dress and her petticoat. And of course the table, which has a very highly polished reflective surface. You can see her daughter Anne's dress is reflected here off of it. Everyone always asks about her jewelry. No idea where her jewelry is right now. Do not know what happened to it. She died in childbirth in 1776. So very, very young, very early. John Cadwallader did remarry. This I'm showing here on the right-hand side is on her dress. This is, these are flowers that are fashioned out of fabric and different textiles that one would pin to their stomacher. So just some details there. These are Charles Wilson Peele when he was from Annapolis and he was sort of a jack of all trades, but the gentleman in Maryland thought that they needed a British grand matter painting. So they sent Charles Wilson Peele to London to study with Benjamin West. And Edward Lloyd IV was one of those men who sent Charles Wilson Peele to London. When he returned, he painted Edward Lloyd IV and let the Cadwalladers know, you've got to have this guy come paint you. He's just fabulous. So Charles Wilson Peele comes to Philadelphia, and that's when he paints the Cadwalladers, what I refer to as like an ancestors gallery of paintings. And that includes John Cadwallader's parents. You can tell that John Cadwallader's parents were Quaker. So this is Dr. Thomas Cadwallader. A Quaker's dress, they often owned fine things, but their dress tends to be not as colorful. So Dr. Thomas Cadwallader there, looking like he was having quite a toothache. And then you have Hannah Lambert Cadwallader here. So in other words, she's in sort of a, like a taupey colored dress, but it's silk. So it's almost like passive aggressive Quakerism. This is a detail of her, her table. And again, you can see that the table has a high polish to it and everything's reflecting off of that. And that's the pin on her little Quaker cap. I'd love to see that. This is John Cadwallader's brother Lambert with a very big belly. And he's wearing also a quite elegant dress. So John Cadwallader and his siblings all became Anglican, later Episcopalian. They were not Quakers like their parents. So, but you can see here this plush. This is a fabric called plush, and he would definitely have been showing this off. This is extraordinarily expensive. Younger sister Martha, who in this painting is sort of looking for a husband, and she did so. She married a man named Dagworthy from Delaware. So there she is with her fruit. The Cadwalladers built a house here in Philadelphia, which was purportedly the most elegant house in all of the colonies. It was torn down in 1816 by Stephen Girard, unfortunately. So we often reference it. I give a whole lecture on their house, but this is just showing what it probably looked like. The most extraordinary feature of the Cadwalladers' house were their beds. The expense and the amount of fabric that were intended to cover these beds and the multiple sets of curtains that they had were really extraordinary. So the purchase orders for their bed fabrics and their beds were extraordinary. This is at Dumfries House in Scotland, but they owned one that virtually matches this with the lantern, etc. So they inherited an amazing amount of furniture from Elizabeth Lloyd's parents. No doubt English, British furniture from Edward Lloyd III. And when they came to Philadelphia, they had Philadelphia artisans make them furniture in the British tradition. So this furniture really does not look like classic Philadelphia furniture, but in fact, it was made in Philadelphia to mimic the British furniture that they were bringing with them. So there was a mix there. And I always say that you didn't want somebody to come into your house and say, oh, this furniture was made down the street in Philadelphia. You wanted people to think it was just elegant, right? And beautiful furniture. And in many ways, in 1770, this was a little bit passé because neoclassicism was coming on quite strong. And this is, of course, the frame. The Cadwalladers actually cut the frames down. They cut the sides off of the frames in 1909. And in 2012 and 2013, I embarked on a project with a conservator where we designed and he recarved one of their frames. And here it is in its glory. So there is furniture, as you can see in the painting, the table, sorry about that. Here's the table, that card table that you saw in the previous slide. And here you can see that she's sitting in a chair that has a cut-through splat. And that is this chair. And I was actually able to purchase this chair at auction in 2003. It is known to have been one of the Cadwalladers' chairs. There are 5 that survived. This was the only one that was sort of out of captivity, the other 4 at Winterthur. So we were able to purchase this chair very fortunately at auction. And when we brought it back to the museum, I suddenly said, oh my gosh, that's the splat of the chair that she's sitting in. So this element right here, that little arm right here, is actually right there. So, and for those with very good, very well-trained eyes, like Peter Sweetser, you'll notice that there's a little, disruption in the wood right there on that splat. And you might think, oh, is that a repair? But actually it's not. The splats of the Cadwallader chairs were larger than the classic template for a splat in Philadelphia. So cabinet makers would have a splat template, and the Cadwalladers, of course, they had to have theirs bigger and better. So theirs is a little wider. And so that's actually a lamination. It's an original lamination to make the splat just that much wider. And make it that much more extraordinary. They also ordered a set of what are known as saddle seat ribbon back chairs. All of their furniture was upholstered, all of the Lloyd family furniture and then the Cadwallader family furniture was upholstered in yellow and blue. And that was the Cadwallader family's, the Lloyd family's coat of arms, the color of their coat of arms. They were properly armed from the College of Arms at the, from London. And so they would have had all their furnishings that color. So these chairs that were made in Philadelphia, this is one that's at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, are made to look like the London ones that the Cadwalladers inherited from the Lloyds. And there you can see that that's the chair that Lambert is leaning on. It's not the exact chair that he's leaning on, but this is the Philadelphia one that was made to look like it. Now, Edward Lloyd IV, of course, inherited his very fair share of his father's estate, which included, of course, the house. He married Elizabeth Taylor Lloyd, who is seen here. She is actually pregnant when this was being taken. And unlike today, they really didn't sort of show their pregnancy. So she's covering up her tummy there. This house, which is behind Edward Lloyd the Fourth in his portrait by Charles Wilson Peele, there's been a lot of discussion of what this may reference. Is this the Y house that he wanted to build? I think it's probably just a conceit, but it also does look a little bit like the family house of Elizabeth Taylor, which is Mount Airy in Warsaw, Virginia, built by William Buckland, who was an architect who came to Virginia, was brought to Virginia by the Taylors to be the architect for actually George Mason at Gunston Hall, as well as here at Mount Airy. So they brought William Buckland from Virginia to Annapolis, and William Buckland was hired to be the architect of the Lloyd's house in Annapolis. So the Cadwalladers built their house up in Philadelphia, and the Lloyds, Edward Lloyd IV and Elizabeth Taylor, build their house in Annapolis, and this one still stands. They purchased the property from Samuel Chase, who had begun to build a house. He dug out the basement, and he decided he didn't want it anymore, and they purchased the property from him and completed this. This is William Buckland's masterpiece. You can see the back of it, the garden view of it, the interior. They imported carvers and plasterers and all sorts of materials from England, from London, to make this a showpiece for the season in Annapolis. And as a man named William Edis, who was a British journalist, came to Annapolis to report on what Annapolis was like. And he says, during the races, assemblies and theatrical presentations were the amusements of the evening, at which the company exhibits a fashionable and brilliant appearance. The varied amusements in Annapolis and numerous parties afford to the young, the gay, and the ambitious an extensive field to contend in the race of vain and idle pursuit. So William Edis also said that he felt that the Annapolitans adopted fashions faster than the Londoners. So that's something said. Annapolis is quite the place. So this is, here it is. One may recognize the Episcopal, the flag of the Episcopal Church. It is the Lloyd House, the Chase Lloyd House as it's known today. The Chase Lloyd House is owned by the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland, and it is a home for women, single women who are widowed women, Episcopal women. And so they live there and maintain the house. And they're quite lovely, and they've been always very generous to visitors and to people like me who want to study the house. Here's some more views of it. Now, inside this house, they used some works of art that were owned by Edward Lloyd III, among them a secretary bookcase, which you see here on the right, and a reading stand here on the left. Now, one has to remember that there's a lot of furniture that was English in colonial North America, and a lot of it has lost its context, has lost its provenance. So here we see English furniture, British furniture. We know its context. So it's really just extraordinary furniture. That secretary bookcase is after this plate from Chippendale. They also owned 12 armchairs, which were painted white and gilt originally, as you can see here, and then upholstered. The cost of the upholstery for these is extraordinary because you have the arms, the seat, the back, and then what's referred to as the outback, which is the reverse side of the seat. Those are also after a Chippendale plate. Sets of armchairs were sort of de rigueur in British and French country houses. And what they do is actually subordinate issues of precedence, right? So everybody's in an armchair, so no one's in charge, really. So they're quite fashionable in a social setting. This is also the time where Edward Lloyd IV begins to acquire neoclassical furniture. And so this is a pair of tables, neoclassical tables that survive at Y, that were made for the Annapolis townhouse, or purchased for the Annapolis townhouse, made in London. That is satin wood that was referred to as fingered in an inventory, fingered wood. So that's a satin wood. Now, Edward Lloyd IV lived in Annapolis during the American Revolution. He did not sign the Declaration. He did participate in the Constitutional Convention. His father had been somewhat of a loyalist, and so the powers that be in Maryland had sort of kept him from signing the Declaration. But they were, in fact, patriots and supporters. Obviously, John Cadwalader was a aide-de-camp of George Washington's and very close friends with him. So now, in 1785, they returned to Y House. Edward Lloyd IV is suffering from gout, which is sort of something that somebody gets from a rich lifestyle. And he tears down his father's house and begins to build a new house for himself. What you can see in this slide is from their library. This is Leone's Palladio. So they have so many of their books still there. He designs this house, we believe, himself. This is what's called the Annapolis Plan. The Annapolis Plan is when you have a center passage that has this is a north-south passage that has an east-west transept here. It has an office to the right. This says here South Parlor, but the family actually in the 18th century referred to it as the withdrawing room. And lost my cursor here. And then it goes into a double parlor that goes onto a porch and then has a garden entrance as well. These are jib doors. Does everybody know what a jib door is? It's a window that pulls all the way up so that you can walk through it. So we'll see that a little bit later. They have a couple of the beds from Edward Lloyd III, but the main thing that they saved from Edward Lloyd III are these two magnificent pier glasses. These are very large 12-foot pier glasses. And the pier glasses actually follow a 1746 design by Batty Langley, which I show you here. You see this guilloche in the frame. And when I was doing my research for my thesis, I took a sample of this and had the conservation labs at Winterthur examine it. And what it showed is that it was water gilded. The original surface was water gilded, and there's a layer of dirt, and then there's oil gilding. So they could see, but the oil gilding was they could tell done a long time ago. So that's what we knew. It had an old surface, not the original, but an old surface. Water gilding they can make into a matte and burnish. Oil gilding is a more sort of monochromatic. So in my research, I suddenly found this, which was a list of goods that were being brought from Baltimore on the Lloyd schooner. And what it includes, you can see here, is vitriol and litharge of gold and turpentine and books of gold leaf and tools and paintbrushes. So what we believed happened was that they actually re-gilded these pier glasses at Wye House. So what happened was Edward Lloyd IV inherited these from Edward III, took them out of his father's house, tore his father's house down, designed his new house, put these back up, and then re-gilded them. Now what that means is that the furniture, the pier glasses themselves, the frames, actually determine the size of the architecture, because when you're designing a house, the size of a pier determines all the proportions of the house. So these are just extraordinary examples of what must have been from Edward Lloyd III's house, and then they became the sort of centerpieces of Edward Lloyd IV's house and beyond, because they are what survived there. Edward Lloyd IV also acquired these paintings dated 1776, signed by Dominic Serres, who was a Spanish-born painter who trained in France and then became King George III's marine painter in his court. And they sort of have the auspicious date of 1776. So there you go. Now, Edward Lloyd IV also began to buy a little bit of furniture from American artisans. And these are two Annapolis pieces made by the partnership of Shaw and Chisholm. Really important to the Lloyds then as now is their landscape, their garden. So these lawn balls survived from the 18th century. And here we have the ha-ha that was built. Edward Lloyd IV took away his father's parterred, very sort of formal parterred garden, and he built a landscape based on what is known as Capability Brown. It was a landscape designer in London, in England, throughout England. He purchased, so he made this ha-ha, which is like a dip that is a visual conceit that won't interrupt one's view. And outside that ha-ha, he had 61 fallow deer. And the deer and the garden were all tended to by a gardener that he procured from London. And the gardener he sought had to fit this bill. He had to be depended upon for his, who can be depended upon for his knowledge, sobriety, and honesty. The gardener actually lived in the house. He, of course, maintained a small fleet of barges and phaetons and schooners. He owned sporting guns and pistols, badminton shuttlecocks, backgammon boards, these lawn bowling balls, and a barn full of racehorses that he imported from England. And he raced both in Annapolis and on the property at Wye House. One of my favorite quotes from one of his purchase orders to London is He ordered in 1791 a marquee, a tent, sufficiently large enough to hold 12 people in private apartments for lodging half a dozen people, bedsteads and bedding complete, tables and seats to accommodate 12 people, intended to be used occasionally on fishing parties on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay. Be particular in the person who you may employ to execute this order, that he understands it well. So this is the greenhouse. The center block is from 1748. Let me find my cursor here. This is 1748, and the wings were built in 1784 when they were building the new house. The new house and the wings to the greenhouse were built by a man overseen by a master builder whose name was William Eaton. And I was actually able to find that payment to him, and it basically said that he was shifting the weatherboarding of the main house to prepare for, shifting the studs of the main house to prepare for the weatherboarding. This is 1784 to 1787 is when that house was built. Here's the greenhouse again. Really, really important structure, and the floor of it is completely vented. I'll show you a slide later that will see that you'll see that in. Here's the entrance actually to the furnace that heated the greenhouse. In addition, as they're furnishing their new Y house, Edward Lloyd IV purchases 14 handsome mahogany chairs for a dining room. This is one that survives. And it would have been upholstered with the best Morocco leather. He writes, nota bene, 2 of these chairs to be arms. And he also wants the cushions or pillows for the settee to be filled with the softest and finest materials. The settee and the bottoms of the chairs neatly stuffed with the best curled hair. And it is hoped that particular attention will be paid in executing this order, as will the whole of the above articles. He also ordered in that livery in yellow and blue silk, accented with gold threads, liquor, peacocks, some peacocks. They would have had peacocks around walking around the garden, as well as a pair of thoroughbred springing spaniels. They must be under the best command, as none others will do. And then they also ordered collars with my name to be sent with them. He ordered a dressing chest here, as well as, quote, fashionable ornamental decorations to set off a dining or supper table that will accommodate 20 people, with a sketch of the table with the images thereon, plain and full directions showing how the ornaments are to be placed there. So I love that, because he doesn't want to seem a fool, right, in how he arranges his ornaments. So by ornaments, he meant these. They're 20 figures that survive. They're not Wedgwood. They're from Niedervilla, which is a very fancy French porcelain manufacturing. And that is 3 parts of a 5-part plateau, a mirrored plateau, sterling silver mirror, and all the original mahogany below it. So that would have been on the table. He also ordered Longman and Broderip's finest tuned organized pianoforte, which must be an approved one or none will answer. He also ordered his a subscription of Boydell's Prince of Shakespeare. And on the back of one that survives at White House, you can see, to the Honorable Edward Lloyd, August 8th, 1792. He began to order furniture, as I said, from American artisans, not particularly elegant furniture, what we refer to as backstairs furniture. So a desk made probably on the Eastern Shore, a secretary here, 2 card tables that survive. When he died in 1796, his probate inventory speaks to the capricious nature of the man his descendants refer to as Edward the Patriot, Edward the Builder, and Edward the Magnificent. His library comprised 2,500 volumes. He owned a camera obscura, a mahogany compound microscope, spyglasses, physics scales, a mahogany case of instruments for the recovery of drowning persons, several pairs of silver-mounted pistols, 640 bottles of Madeira, 1,822 bottles of sweet wine, 69 pints of port, 3 demi-johns of apple brandy, a case of gin and brandy in cut glass bottles, a cask of whiskey. So you can see why he had gout. The list of silver plate exceeded 1,000 pounds. So, as well as, of course, all the furniture for his house. Now, at his father's death in 1796, 17-year-old Edward Lloyd V inherited several 100,000 acres of land, the Annapolis House, Y House, portions of both houses' furnishings, 320 enslaved people. As the new patriarch, Edward V also assumed responsibility for his mother, who returned to the Annapolis House. She didn't like White House. And 2 unmarried sisters. Elizabeth eventually married Henry Hall Harwood, and Mary Taylor Lloyd, who was called Polly, married Francis Scott Key, who, of course, you know, penned the Star-Spangled Banner. Within less than 2 years, Edward V himself had married Sarah Scott Murray of Annapolis and produced an heir named, surprisingly, Edward. Additionally, in 1787, he sold 11,000 pounds of his father's household furnishings at a Baltimore auction. So do you see there's this tradition of selling your father's stuff and buying new things? Edward V went on a buying spree. He purchased this desk from John Shaw, which he put in his office between the piers. For his garden, he purchased numerous things, including this billiard table, which he put on the second floor of the greenhouse. Now, New Englander John Adams described Maryland as a place where, quote, the lands are cultivated and all sorts of trades are exercised by Negroes or by transported convicts, which has occasioned the planters and farmers to assume the title of gentlemen. They hold their Negroes and convicts, that is, all laboring people and tradesmen, in such contempt that they think themselves a distinct order of beings. Hence, they will never suffer their sons to labor or learn any trade, but they bring them up in idleness, or what is worse, in horse racing, cockfighting, and card playing. So John Adams had no love for Marylanders, and he certainly would have seen the billiard playing that took place at Y House as a part of that, and the gambling. This is the room, the billiard room, above the greenhouse. The billiard table was sold to Winterthur. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And here are just some details of it. Billiard tables themselves were not rare in America, but this one is extraordinary survival. They just didn't survive, and it's absolutely enormous. So Edward Lloyd V began turning his attention to selling his wheat through merchants in Baltimore, and therefore he purchased his works of art and furnishings from Baltimore. A linen press from William Martin, 22 pounds, a set of dining chairs from William Singleton, of which one survives, and this one is at Williamsburg. He became the governor of Maryland in 1809, and when he returned to Y House, he began purchasing from a man named Edward Priestley, whose shop was right here in Baltimore. He purchased 2 sofas, several card tables, and you can see the mahogany here. Edward Priestley was also a lumber merchant, which many cabinet makers were, and so he had access to the best mahogany. A 3-pedestal dining table, that seated over 20 people, as well as a sideboard. You can see the sideboard here. This was destroyed in the early 20th century, but the knife vases, which they ordered from England, were not destroyed, so you can see them there. Some desks that remain at the house, as well as Edward Priestley redid their banister for them. So it's very typical that a cabinet maker would engage in such architectural details. And making a banister is actually quite a difficult feat. So they purchased a new lamp for the passage, and when they did that, they purchased a new banister. The old banister probably had candle arms that came off of it. They did have painted furniture. After I wrote my thesis, the owner's son actually found this table in a barn and invited me down to come help them look for more. This table is obviously missing a leg and a leaf, but it's in remarkable condition because it's never been touched. So in museums, we love that. We call that benign neglect. So there it is with a replaced leg and replaced top. When I went searching in the barn, I found this cornice, which is an extraordinary survival, the only one known and documented to the Finlay brothers of Baltimore. It fits right in their withdrawing room. It's obviously one of 2 that they purchased. That's a thrysus. This is a thrysus. This is the symbol of Dionysus or Bacchus. And here you can see how such a cornice would have been used. They continued to purchase furniture from Maryland and some Annapolis, but mainly Baltimore cabinet makers. You can see here, chest of drawers, a marble-topped washstand. Edward Lloyd V was also the official host of Lafayette when he came to Maryland in 1824. These types of clocks have always had this apocryphal, being given to somebody by Lafayette. Could have been, but probably not. Here you see, again, the trophies of wheat farming. The Lloyds always boast their trophies of wheat farming. When Edward Lloyd V died in 1834, the income from the slave economy was dwindling, and so it was a little more difficult to make the money that they were used to making, as well as it was being divided among the descendants and the heirs. Edward Lloyd VI, this is his name on a bed that he took with him to the Deep South, where he brought numerous enslaved people and began cultivating cotton in Louisiana, Arkansas, and Mississippi. Edward Lloyd V had married a woman named Alicia McBlair from Baltimore, and they redid a house called Y Heights and purchased this from Edward Priestley, a wonderful pier table with a liquor case underneath. It's on casters, so it would have moved about the room. And frames for marble slabs, that's what it's known as, because the marble is actually the work that takes precedence there. So a frame for marble slab comes from Chippendale on through and popular throughout the 19th century. The carving on these is actually done by stonemasons. So stonemasons would work at night and different times for cabinet makers. And you can see how the quality of this carving has the look of a stonemason. The design comes from Thomas Hope, who was a British classical designer. You can see it there. But what survives at White House from this period is primarily the large pieces, because they were not able to be discarded, right? So all of their wardrobes, you see 2 wardrobes here, 2 more from the 1840s. They purchased 100 chairs, of which a handful survive, and this is one of them, again, from that period of Edward Lloyd VI. This is the armoire that he purchased for himself when he was living down south and cultivating the cotton in the late 1830s. He brought it home with him from New Orleans in 1841. It is a New Orleans-made armoire. Very extraordinary. These are, not many of these survive, and so this is a really unusual and interesting way that this came to Maryland. So the family in the 1850s and 60s began to really recognize their significance to Maryland, and they began to be referred to as an ancient family of Maryland. And so here Alice Lloyd has written her name, memorialized herself here on a chair. And you see more of this in the family beginning in the 1850s. Also in the 1850s, they purchased for Edward Lloyd VII and his bride a set of painted furniture from Baltimore, from Charles Ware and Company, that is in the former library, actually. But the family began to recognize themselves more as sort of one of the ancient founders of Maryland. And certainly the Civil War came, and their economy really began to crumble. Edward Lloyd VII was a highly respected officer in the United States Navy. And when he inherited the house in 1907, it looked a little bit like this, but he could not afford to pay the taxes on it. So he was forced to sell it to his brother. His brother is the man seen here in the center, Charles Howard Lloyd. Charles Howard Lloyd married his second cousin, who's on the right there, and her name was Mary Lloyd Howard Lloyd. She had inherited money from her father, and then her mother, who was the daughter of Francis Scott Key and Polly Lloyd. She had inherited money from them and was able to pay the taxes and purchase the house from his brother for $2,800, furnishings included. That was in 1907. The family begins to recognize themselves as, like, again, these forebears of colonial North America, and they purchase reproduction furniture. This is pothouse furniture from Baltimore that they purchased to furnish the house. But the house has kind of a, you know, they didn't add electricity until 1916. And this is the house in that period, in the 19-teens. Sort of a little sad. Beginning in the 1930s, it had fallen into the ownership of two women, the daughters of Charles Howard Lloyd, that little baby who was in the picture from 1896. Her name was Joanna, and her sister Elizabeth inherit the house, and they begin to prepare and gussy it up for some special visitors. Their childhood friend and her husband. So White House begins in the 1930s to get to be a little more refreshed. And the 1930s pictures, which you see here, the interiors. Again, Elizabeth Lloyd Schiller and Joanna Lloyd Hughes are gussying it up for some visitors. Their very close friend growing up was Wallace Warfield, and the three of them went to school together at Oldfields, and they made their debut together in Baltimore, and they were very close friends. And Wallace and her husband, the former King of England, came to White House many times. They even built a house for them in which to stay. So here they are. And I often, talk about, it's hard when you're not there to see how large it is, but you can see, now she was known to be a very small woman, but she's standing in front of the greenhouse. Those windows of the greenhouse, I did get the measurements from the architectural drawings, are 12 feet 8 inches high. Here she is sitting on the front steps, and here's a crowd of people standing on the front steps. So this is that little baby who we saw in the picture. This is she as a grown-up, and this is Elizabeth Schiller, and then here, of course, we have Wallace, and then King Edward right there. The windows of the main house are 10 feet 8 inches high. So when I came to I should say Elizabeth Schiller is the one who sold the billiard table. In return, Henry Francis DuPont had this painting reproduced for her because it had gone out of the family. So this is a reproduction of the Charles Willson Peale painting of Edward the Builder that is now at the house. And when I came upon White House, it was through the auspices of this lovely, lovely, lovely lady whose name was Mary Donald Tillman. Mrs. Tillman, to me, always, she was called Grandma Y by my parents. I mean, by my children. But she allowed me to study her house every little bit and go through every closet and every piece of furniture. And she was just the most wonderful collaborator with me. And she would always start a sentence and saying, I would ask her a question about something and she said, well, I don't know much, but, and of course she knew everything. So she was just a well-read, brilliant, fabulous woman. And after her husband died, she began to bring White House into really the 21st century, but really ahead of her time. She maintained and had all the monuments in the graveyard cleaned. She took the captain's house and rebuilt it. Here you can see it had struggled and made it into a house for herself so that her son and daughter-in-law could move into the big house. When she went to repaint the big house, here it is. When she went to repaint it, she said to me, Alexandra, what do I do about the shutters? And I said, well, it didn't originally have shutters. And she said, oh, good. Well, you just saved me a lot of money. So she began lead paint abatement on the house. You can imagine that this was quite a do to have the lead paint taken off without torches or anything. I want to show you the size of the house, however. This is a Suburban XL. This is a photographer's truck that we were doing photography that day. That's a Suburban, so you can see how enormous the house really is. When it's in its landscape, it doesn't appear so big, but it really is just a tremendous house. And here it is finished. It's repainting. By the way, we believe it originally was white. She preferred yellow. I said, great, do it yellow. she began to conserve, to have the conservators work on the works of art. So this is the Benjamin West painting of Richard Bennett Lloyd. She had the Dominic Saris paintings conserved. She conserved the cornice that we found. She worked on the greenhouse, and her son and daughter-in-law have gone even further with the greenhouse, having all the vents carefully done, and they had archaeologists working in there. They had the furnace actually made safe, and so this is really one of the more important buildings in our country, especially if you're interested in gardens and the history of gardens. She also invited archaeologists to come to the property and begin to look for the remnants of the slave dwellings, and they did find them. It was an extraordinary time to have a whole crew of archaeologists from the University of Maryland descend for months at a time, literally digging up her land, her private land, and they found all sorts of materials to document where the slave dwellings were, what they were made of, and what they owned. So it was resulted in several exhibitions. This one at the Academy Art Museum in Easton, New York Times articles, USA Today articles, and then she spearheaded and mostly funded this statue of Frederick Douglass outside the Talbot County Courthouse. And I hope you can see here the coat of arms of the Talbot County is the Lloyd coat of arms. And also it resulted in a book, a wonderful book about enslaved people at White House. This is actually, truth be told, a picture of my children at a wedding, at a family wedding at White House. And you can see this, and I just love this because it shows that the house is still living. The family is still living there. Mrs. Tillman actually even allowed descendants of enslaved people to have their family reunion at White House. She was never, proud of that part. She would say, I can't be held responsible for the actions of my ancestors, and she was never proud of it, but it was a fact. And she was as welcoming and as she could be. But her family actually still lives there, and everybody comes back there. It has been an extraordinary experience to be part of that. This is a baptism that we also attended, where 4 babies were baptized. 1, 2, 3, 4 were baptized. And this green arrow is the Lloyd family Worcester bowl from the 1790s that has been used to baptize all the Lloyds. This is in the North Parlor, and this is where baptisms take place, weddings take place, and unfortunately funerals do as well. They lay the coffin in the North Parlor, and it is walked down to the graveyard and buried. So quite an emotional thing actually to do. The babies tend to love the silver waiter. So the story is that Lloyd babies were presented to their father on the silver waiter. And here you can see one of those babies who was being baptized on the waiter. They love the waiter because they can, they see their reflection in it. So it's really a fun thing. And here's, of course, just the party. So I thank you very much for having me. I hope I haven't spoken too long. There's a lot to say, and I'm happy to answer any questions that one may have.
This is Hanson Robbins, and I thank you so much for a very interesting lecture. We open it up to questions. You can unmute,
Here I see the
your
chat.
mics and ask away.
Yes. So so John Cadwallader had a house in Kent County in Shrewsbury. So Elizabeth Lloyd, his wife, as part of her marriage contract, all sorts of silver, et cetera, a lot of silver that's here at the museum, as well as the property at Shrewsbury Farm. I always remind people in Philadelphia that he was a general because they call him the general. John Cadwallader was a general for the state of Maryland, not Pennsylvania, because he was landed, so to speak, in Maryland. So he spent a lot of time at Shrewsbury, even after Elizabeth Lloyd died. He also donated the most money to the founding of Washington College, 50 pounds. And he is buried at the Episcopal Church in Galena, Maryland. Okay, now hold on one sec. This is tough for me. Oops.
Alexandra,
Yes.
at what point did the Tillmans become part of the Lloyd family?
Interesting. So Mrs. Tillman's mother was a Lloyd. She was Joanna Lee Lloyd. She married Singer, and she had 2 marriages, but she married Singer and had Mrs. Tillman, and Mrs. Tillman married her husband, whose name was Richard Carmichael Tillman. Okay, so and he is from the Centerville area. His family was from the Centerville area. Actually, he was a descendant of the Lloyds, the Goldsboroughs, the Carmichaels, and the Tillmans. She was a descendant, of course, of the Lloyds, the Donnells, and the Singer family, a very prominent Pittsburgh family. So she acquired, I mean, the Lloyds had married into the Tillman family in 1709, something like that. And he descended from them. So they were 8 cousins from dating back to the 18th century. But her ownership of it began in 1993. And her son is Richard Tillman, Richard Carmichael Tillman Jr. And he and his wife Beverly live there.
Thank you.
Regarding
Alexandra,
the,
Alexandra, is there any connection between this Lloyd and a family Demarest Lloyd in Massachusetts on the New England coast, where they have an enormous amount of land?
Right. So there are 2 types of Lloyds that came from Wales. There are the Quaker Lloyds and the non-Quaker Lloyds. So if they are Quaker Lloyds, then they do relate to them, back in Wales. There is a Massachusetts connection, actually a Revere family Massachusetts connection to the Lloyds, but I'll have to look into that because I don't know the answer. There are Lloyds here in colonial Philadelphia, but they're not related. Lloyds of London, however, is this Lloyd. They are the Quaker Lloyds, and it was Edward Lloyd I's uncle who started Lloyds of London.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
regarding the greenhouse, was the greenhouse used for decorative gardens, or was it vegetables and herbs, and is it still used, is it still growing things today?
Right. So actually, that's a great question. So it is used for what they referred to in the 18th century as ornamental plants, right? So ornamental plants, but also a lot of citrus plants. Of course, they were well aware, remember they're seafaring family, so they were well aware of the importance of citrus. And they mainly grew citrus in there. In fact, in their library, I have this whole thing on their library, whole presentation on that, because you can see what Edward Lloyd the Fourth in particular was interested in the greenhouse when he expanded it to grow, because he has this whole library of books on how to grow this, that, and the other thing. But it was mainly what I referred to as ornamentals, so tropical plants, and it faces due south. It faces due south, and they would have heated them throughout the winter. I am not certain what it was used for in the summer. It's quite a sort of humid building in the summer, as you can imagine, but I'm not sure what they used it for then, but it was mainly for citrus. And yes, the family still uses it. They do not, of course, use the heating mechanism of it, and that was the demise of most greenhouses in this country. The furnaces caught fire. So there are also 2 sets of furnaces, because the main block was 1748. And so there was a furnace and vents for that. And then when they added on, they had to expand it. So, but what the Tillmans grow today mainly admire lemons. Is Mabel Lloyd Ridgely of the noted Ridgely family of Dover, Delaware, a relative? Yes. Okay, that was privately.
I have a question. Tell me, during the Civil War, which side were the Lloyds on?
That's a great question. There are 2 sides. There are both sides, like so many, especially
Both sides.
Marylanders. William Widener is a prominent Confederate general, and he is buried there. There were also some Union family members. The Civil War buffs love to come to White House and decorate the graveyard at different times. So both sides. So was the newer house built on the foundations of the older house? Sort of. Very interesting question. So in 1785, he designs the house. He has his father's house torn down, and then he actually pays a surveyor to find the proper north-south axis. And he repositions the house to have a better north-south axis, which is an interesting prospect. You're looking at a view, right, of White House?
Yes.
Can you tell that the house and the greenhouse are not on axis? And that is because the greenhouse the main block of the greenhouse dates to 1748. So the main house was built around, sort of near the foundations of Edward Lloyd III's house, but not directly on it. The reason that one wanted to capture that perfect north-south axis is because of a breeze. And Mrs. Tillman did, her son wanted, of course, air conditioning in the house, as one would want on the Eastern Shore. We were very nervous about this because you don't want the structure to get wet, right, with the humidity. So anyway, she installed actually geothermal. This is in 2001, she installed geothermal, and that was really early for geothermal technology. But it does have geothermal technology to keep the humidity not too far off from what it is outside. It's very dangerous when you have thick walls like that to have too much humidity running through them. But having been in the house prior to air conditioning being in there, the reason you want the proper north-south axis is for the breeze. Because that passage, when it was open, would just capture the breeze, and it was amazing. So that's why Edward Lloyd the Fourth wanted that. Do you have any furniture or objects from John Cadwallader's house? Yes, the Philadelphia Museum of Art owns the most Cadwallader furniture of anyone. We have 2 chairs, 3 tables, an easy chair, a pole screen, and the 5 paintings, and silver. We have 4 pieces of the Lloyd silver. I saw do you know where in Mississippi? Yes, I do. I don't have it on the top of my head, but I can find out where the Mississippi lands were. So I'll think, you know what, I'm going to think of the name of the town. And like, as soon as I close off, I'll think of it, I'm sure. I saw the pool table at Winter Tour when the guide mistakenly took us to that floor. Yes, it's magnificent and huge. Do they ever have tours of the property? Yes, they do. They tend also, they're extremely philanthropic people. Richard Tillman is a retired attorney. He was with Piper Marbury for many, many years. And they do tours, mainly through the Maryland Historical Trust, as well as through the Maryland Historical Society. He's on the board now and very involved at the Maryland Historical Society. But they also, and the Academy Art Museum in Easton, but they do it a lot for philanthropic events. So they donate it, a tour. I will tell you, you can see the little, the dependencies off to the right there. When Henry Latrobe, the architect, visited the house, he described it as a mother dog with her puppies trailing behind her. Does anyone else have any other questions? I'd be happy to answer.
Yes.
Okay.
Is the property close to Chesapeake College?
No.
I don't know where Chesapeake College is, I'm sorry.
Oh, well, that's on Route 50 on the way to Easton.
Oh.
Yeah, it's before you get to Easton, but that's why I was thinking when I'm saying why house, I'm just thinking that might be.
So you see, as I said, they had all these properties and they named them different things. Presqu'Île, Sharptown, Sharp, Y Heights, Y Town, Y Farm, Y Plantation, Y Hall, and then this is Y House. So
Okay.
this is about, I'm gonna say 8 miles, no, not that many. Well, anyway, it's quite a way from Route 50, from the bypass. I get off, well, it's public knowledge, it's on Bruff's Island Road. So, Bruff's Island Road.
I was just about 10 miles south of the Chesapeake College.
Yes,
Okay,
okay.
thanks.
Does anyone?
Well, I think we've about time to wind it up. It's been
Okay.
a little bit over what we expected. And I just want to say thank you so much for.
Well, you're welcome. I'm sorry
such a-
about that.
No, it was wonderful.
Okay, good. Well, thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. I'm sorry we can't be in
We'd
person.
all give you applause, but thank you.
Okay.
And
Thank you so much.
leave off.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Right.